The first thing you learn, working fire watch in the Oregon high country, is that the silence has a sound. People think silence is the absence of sound, but it isn't. Silence has a low, patient hum to it, the way an empty room hums when you put your ear against the wall. The forest in October hums like that. Not wind. Not animals. Just the slow breathing of something very old and very tired. I've worked the towers for 11 seasons now. I'm 36 years old. I have a small apartment in Pendleton that I keep mostly so my mail has somewhere to go, and a truck that smells like sawdust and instant coffee, and a job description that fits on a single laminated card the department gives you when you sign on. Maintain. Inspect. Report. Stay alive. What I'm going to tell you happened over the last 14 months. I'm telling it now because I'm not going back next season. I've already mailed in the paperwork. I'm telling it because I want it written down somewhere outside my own head, where I can stop carrying it alone. I'll change the names of the towers. The ones that are on the maps, anyway. The one that isn't on any map, I don't have to change. It doesn't have a name. My job, on paper, is straightforward. The Forest Service contracts out maintenance and seasonal commissioning for fire lookout towers across the Umatilla and Wallowa-Whitman National Forests. There are dozens of these towers still standing in Oregon, though most of them aren't staffed anymore. Some were decommissioned in the 70s. Some still get a summer spotter when the fire risk gets serious. My job is to keep them functional. Replace shingles. Check the propane. Test the radios. Clear the catwalks. Sometimes I'm up there alone for 2 weeks at a stretch, sleeping on a cot, listening to the wind work the guy wires. The towers all have personalities. You learn this after a few seasons. High Ridge has a stove that won't draw right unless you crack the south window. Saddle Butte gets struck by lightning so often the old logbooks read like a war diary. There's one near the Grande Ronde that the deer like, and they'll come right up the stairs and stand on the catwalk at night, breathing fog onto the glass. I knew them all. I thought I knew them all. In September of last year, my supervisor, a man named Doyle, who I'd worked under for 6 seasons, called me into the district office in Pendleton. The office is one of those buildings that hasn't been renovated since the Carter administration. Wood paneling. A coffee maker that makes everything taste like burned paper. He sat me down and slid a folder across the desk. Got an extra one this year, he said. The folder was thin. 1 page of coordinates. 1 page of a maintenance checklist. No photographs. No tower number. No name. I looked at the coordinates. I knew that country well enough to picture it. Eastern slope of the Blues, up past where the logging roads stopped being maintained. Steep, unfriendly terrain. A lot of basalt. A lot of dead larch. I don't have anything out there, I said. Doyle was quiet for a moment. He didn't look up at me. He was rearranging pens on his desk in a way that suggested he had practiced not looking up at me. It's a quiet tower, he said. Off cycle. Inspection only. You'll go up, do the checklist, come back down. 2 days. Don't sleep in it. I waited for more. There wasn't more. He said the pay was a flat rate, separate from my normal contract. Direct deposit, different account code. He said I shouldn't log the trip in my regular maintenance journal. He said if anyone asked where I'd been those 2 days, I'd been on personal leave. I asked him whose tower it was. He said, "It's just a tower, Hollis." He'd known me for 6 years. He'd never called me by my last name before. I took the folder. I want to be honest about something. I took the folder because the money was good, and because I trusted Doyle, and because I'd been doing this work long enough that I'd encountered a half-dozen little institutional weirdnesses over the years, and they had always turned out to be boring. A tower built on contested tribal land. A tower funded by a defunct mining concern. A tower whose paperwork had been lost in a fire in 1962 and which the service was quietly maintaining out of embarrassment. I assumed this was something like that. I drove up on a Tuesday. The weather was clear and cold, the sky that hard blue you only see in the Oregon high desert in fall, where it looks like glass somebody is about to tap. The road in was bad. Not the worst I'd ever driven, but bad. The last 6 miles were a logging spur that hadn't been graded in maybe 20 years. Fallen branches. A washed-out culvert I had to ford on foot first to check the depth. My truck bottomed out twice. When I finally got to the trailhead, and I'm calling it a trailhead, but there was no trail, just a place where the road ended at a stand of dead Douglas firs, I had to hike the last mile and a half with my pack and toolkit. The tower wasn't where the coordinates said it should be. I want to be clear about that, because it's the first thing that I noticed, and it's the kind of thing you tell yourself you misread. I had the GPS, and I had the paper coordinates, and I walked to the exact point, and there was nothing there. Just a clearing of yellow grass and basalt scree. I stood in that clearing for maybe 5 minutes, checking and rechecking the GPS, and then I happened to look up and to the south, and the tower was there. It was maybe 200 yards away, on a slightly higher rise. I would have sworn, I will swear, to anyone who asks, that I had looked in that direction when I came into the clearing and seen nothing. I'm not going to make a thing of this. I'm telling you because it happened. I told myself, at the time, that I'd come up the ridge at an angle that put the tower behind a stand of trees, and that when I turned around to check the GPS I just shifted enough to see it. That's a reasonable explanation. I held on to that explanation for a long time. The tower itself was, and this is important, completely normal. That was almost the strangest thing about it. It was a standard L4 cab on a 30-foot wooden frame, the kind the CCC built in the late 30s. Cedar shingles, green trim, the catwalk railings painted that specific shade of Forest Service brown that fades to a kind of pinkish gray after about 15 years in the sun. It looked like every other tower I'd ever worked on. It was in good repair. Better repair, honestly, than most. I climbed the stairs. The stairs didn't creak. That's another thing I noticed and pushed aside. Every tower I've ever been in has stairs that creak. These didn't. The cab was clean. Swept. The shutters were folded open and latched on the outside, which meant someone had been here recently, because you don't leave the shutters open through a winter unless you want broken glass. The Osborne fire finder in the center of the room, that big circular map device they use for triangulating smoke, was in pristine condition. The brass was polished. The map under the glass was new. I noted that, because the maps under those things usually fade to yellow within a couple of seasons. There was a logbook on the desk. Standard service issue. I opened it. The entries went back about 40 years. They were in different hands, different inks. They were all extremely short. Most of them said some version of the same thing. Asterisk October 14th. Clear. No activity. Asterisk. Asterisk NOV 2nd. Overcast. No activity. Asterisk. Asterisk August 22nd. Smoke column SW, dismissed at 1340. Asterisk. Asterisk February 6th. Heavy snow. No activity. Asterisk. 40 years of no activity. From a tower that wasn't supposed to be staffed. I did my checklist. I checked the propane, which was full. I checked the radio, which powered on but produced only a soft hiss. I checked the stove. I checked the catwalk bolts. I checked the lightning rod. Everything was in better shape than it had any right to be. I was finished by 3 in the afternoon. Doyle had told me not to sleep in the tower. The drive back down the spur would put me on the main road well after dark, and I had been planning, honestly, to ignore Doyle and stay the night. I'd brought my sleeping bag. The cot was made up. I went down the stairs and started hiking back to my truck. I want to tell you why. I want to be able to say I had some specific bad feeling, some moment of intuition. I didn't. I just found, as I was packing up my tools, that I was already walking out. My body had decided before my mind had. By the time I got to the truck, my hands were shaking, and I didn't know why. I drove out. The drive felt longer than the drive in. I didn't think about the tower again for about 3 weeks. That's not entirely true. I thought about it the way you think about something you don't want to think about. It would surface in the shower, or while I was driving, and I would gently set it down again. I did my other work. I winterized 2 towers near Hepner. I helped a crew replace a roof on a lookout near Anthony Lakes. I drank too much one Saturday and watched a college football game I didn't care about. In early November, Doyle called me again. "Need you to go back up," he said. "Same place. Same protocol." I asked him why. He said, "Routine reinspection." I'd worked fire watch for 11 years. There is no such thing as a routine reinspection 6 weeks after a maintenance check. That's not how the service works. That's not how any agency works. You don't double the labor cost on a tower that isn't even staffed. I said okay. The drive-in, the second time, was harder, because the weather had turned. There'd been snow at elevation. Not much, maybe 3 inches on the ground at the trailhead, but enough that the spur road was treacherous, and the hike up was slow. I had to break trail in places. I was alone, the way you're always alone in that country in November, and the silence was the kind I described at the beginning. That low, patient hum. The tower was where it was supposed to be this time. I noted that too. I didn't know what to do with the noting. The logbook had a new entry. It said, October 28th. Pressure drop. No activity, The handwriting was not mine. I had been the only person up there in October. I stood with the logbook in my hand for a long time. The handwriting was neat, slightly slanted, in blue ballpoint. It was not familiar. It was not Doyle's. I had seen Doyle's handwriting on 1,000 forms. I looked around the cab. Nothing was moved. Nothing was disturbed. The cot was made the way I'd left it. I did my checklist. Everything was fine. The radio, when I turned it on, produced its soft hiss, and then, for about 4 seconds, the hiss thinned out into what sounded almost like a voice, a long, low syllable, drawn out, with no consonants in it, and then it returned to hiss. I noted this in my personal notebook. I did not note it in the tower logbook. I don't know why I made that distinction. I made it without thinking about it. I did not stay the night. I hiked out as the light was failing. I got to my truck just as full dark came down, and I sat in the cab with the heater running for almost 10 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. The next morning I went into the district office to file my paperwork on the towers I'd done that week. Doyle wasn't there. There was a woman at the front desk I hadn't seen before, older, in a service uniform, with reading glasses on a chain. She took my forms. I asked her, casually, if she knew anything about the unlisted tower. She looked up at me, and her face did something I have thought about a lot since. It didn't change expression, exactly. It just settled. The way a pond settles after you've thrown a rock into it. Her eyes went still. She said, "I talked to Doyle about that." I said I wanted to, but he wasn't in. She said, "He'll be in tomorrow." Then she went back to her paperwork. I waited a moment. I said, "Have you been with the service long?" She said, "Long enough." She didn't look up. I left. I started, around then, to pay closer attention to the other people who did this work. There's a small community of us in eastern Oregon: maintenance contractors, seasonal spotters, fire crews, a few district employees. We see each other at the same bars and the same gas stations and the same cheap motels. I had drinks that month with a man named Reyes who'd been a spotter for 15 years, and a woman named Carol who did electrical work on the towers, and an old man named Bill Pettigrew who'd been retired for a decade but still came around. I didn't ask any of them directly. I asked indirectly. I'd say, "Have you ever been sent to a tower that wasn't on the maps?" I'd say it like a joke. I'd say it the way you'd ask if anyone had ever seen a ghost. Reyes laughed and said no. Caro said, "There's a couple old ones up by Hell's Canyon that aren't on the public maps, but they're on the service maps." Pettigrew didn't say anything. He drank his beer and looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "You ought to be careful what questions you ask in this country, Hollis." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, It means what it means. He left shortly after. I didn't see him again for a while. I went back to the tower 3 more times that winter. December, January, February. Each time Doyle called me. Each time, it was a flat-rate contract on a different account code. Each time, there was a new entry in the logbook that I had not written. *NOV 19th. Visibility reduced. No activity, *. Deck 30th. Heavy weather NW, tracked. No activity, *. Jan 22nd. Pressure drop. Pressure return. No activity, *. The handwriting was always the same. Neat, slightly slanted blue ballpoint. In January, the radio did the voice thing again. It was longer this time, maybe 12 seconds. It was a sound like someone humming through a long tube. There were no words. The pitch rose and fell in a way that almost resembled speech. The way a foreign language you don't speak almost resembles speech, but it was not language. When it stopped, the static came back exactly where it had left off, like a tape resuming. In February, I noticed that the snow around the base of the tower was disturbed. Not tracks. Not footprints. Just disturbed. As if something heavy had been dragged across it in long, slow lines, and then the lines had partially filled back in with new snow. I followed them about 30 feet into the trees before I stopped. I stopped because the lines were getting deeper as they went, and I didn't want to know what was at the end of them. That's the truth. I turned around and walked back to the tower and did my checklist and left. I started keeping a separate notebook. A small one. I kept it in my truck under the seat. I wrote down everything I noticed. I want to be honest about my mental state during this period. I was sleeping poorly. I was drinking more than I should have been. I had moments where I would lose track of small chunks of time. I'd be making coffee, and then I'd be sitting at the table with a cold cup in front of me, and I wouldn't remember sitting down. This had happened to me before, in other hard winters, and I never thought much of it. I thought about it now. I went to see a doctor in March. He asked me about my drinking, and I told him, mostly honestly. He asked about head injuries. He asked about family history. He ordered some basic blood work. Everything came back unremarkable. He asked me what was making me anxious. I told him work was busy. In late March I drove out to see Bill Pettigrew at his place outside La Grande. He had a small property on a county road, a single wide on a foundation, a wood shop in the back where he made furniture nobody bought. I brought a 6-pack and a bottle of bourbon. He let me in. We didn't say much for a while. He'd had a stroke the year before that had affected his speech, and he spoke slowly now, with long pauses, the way some old men do when they're choosing their words. I told him about the tower. I told him about the logbook entries. I told him about the radio. I told him about the snow. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You ever read the old fire reports? From before the war?" I said I'd read some. He said, "You know what they called the weather back then, when something came through that didn't fit?" I said no. He said, "They called it off-pattern. That was the official term. Off-pattern weather. Used to be a whole separate filing system for it. Different forms. Different cabinet. You'd write up a regular fire report on a regular fire, and you'd write up an off-pattern report on something else." I asked him what something else meant. He shook his head slowly. "Weather that didn't behave. Storms that came in from the wrong direction. Pressure systems that didn't show up on the synoptic charts. Lightning without clouds. Snow in August. They'd come through, and they'd go, and the regular records wouldn't show them. The off-pattern records would." I asked him if the off-pattern records still existed. He said, "They got rid of them in '78. Well, that's what the official line is. I worked in records for 2 years in the early '80s, Hollis. I'll tell you what I saw. I saw cabinets in the basement of the Pendleton office that nobody had a key for. I saw mail come in addressed to offices that weren't on the directory. I saw payroll codes for positions that nobody could tell me what they did. He took a long drink. And I saw towers on internal maps that weren't on the public maps. Towers that didn't have numbers. Just locations. I said, "Why?" He said, "Hollis, I don't know why. I worked there 2 years and I left because I didn't want to know why. I'll tell you the only thing I figured out, and it's not much. Those towers aren't watching for fire." I asked him what they were watching for. He said, "I think they're watching for the thing that comes with the weather." I asked him what that meant. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Hollis, I'm an old man and I've had a stroke and I've been drinking. I don't know what it means. I know I saw a report once, from 1953, that described a storm cell over the Wallowas that didn't show up on any other instrument. Just the one tower. The report said the storm was on the ground for 6 hours, and it said the spotter logged no activity, but at the bottom of the report, at the bottom, somebody had written, in pencil, "Recommend continued observation." And I know that report was filed under a code I never saw on anything else, and I know that when I asked my supervisor about that code, he told me to forget I'd seen it. And I know I worked there 2 more weeks and then I quit. He set his glass down. He said, "If they're sending you up there, Hollis, they think you're the kind of man who doesn't ask questions. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're not. I'd think about which one you want to be." I want to describe the storm. It came in the first week of April. I'd been called up to the tower again. Doyle had called me on a Sunday night, and his voice had been different. Tighter. He said the weather service was tracking a system. He said I needed to be in the tower by Tuesday afternoon. He said to bring 2 weeks of supplies. He said don't sleep in it had been rescinded. He said I would be staying through the duration. I asked him through the duration of what? He said, "Through the storm, Hollis." I asked him why this one was different. He said, "It just is. Are you in or are you out?" I said I was in. I want to tell you why I said yes. I had been telling myself for months that I was going to quit. I had been writing things in my notebook. I had been driving up that bad road in winter weather to do work for an agency that wouldn't acknowledge the work in writing. By every measure of self-preservation, I should have said no. I said yes because I wanted to see it. That's the truth I came to over those months. The reason people keep going up to that tower is not because they're told to. It's because once you've been up there, you want to know. The wanting is the worst part. The wanting is what they're counting on. I drove up on Tuesday morning. The weather, when I left Pendleton, was clear. By the time I hit the spur road, the sky to the west had gone the color of wet slate. There was no wind. That was the first thing I noticed. A storm system coming in, and no wind at all. The air was so still I could hear my own engine ticking after I shut it off. I hiked up. The light was strange. There were no shadows. The clouds had thickened into a single gray ceiling that didn't seem to be moving, and the light came through it evenly, from every direction at once. I had been in that country in every kind of weather, and I had never seen light like that. I got to the tower. The shutters were already folded out. I climbed up. The cab was clean. The logbook was on the desk. I want to mention the logbook entry that was waiting for me, because I think about it. It said, April 7th. Arrival pending. Continued observation, The handwriting was the same. The date was that day. I set my pack down. I started my checklist. The radio, when I turned it on, was silent, not static, but silent, the way a radio is silent when its frequency is being actively suppressed. I sat at the desk. I looked out the windows. The country fell away in every direction, dark and silver gray, and the clouds hung above it without moving. I logged my arrival in my personal notebook. I did not log it in the tower logbook. I had stopped logging in the tower logbook months ago. The tower logbook was not for me to log in. I had figured that out, eventually. Doyle called me on the radio at 1600. The radio came on by itself, not the soft hiss, but a clear channel, and his voice in it. He said, Hollis. Confirm position. I said I was in the tower. He said, confirm equipment status. I went through the equipment. He listened to each item. He didn't ask me about anything else. At the end, he said, "Hollis, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to not respond on this channel. Just listen." "Understood." I said understood. He said, "The system that's coming in is going to last between 40 and 70 hours. During that period, the tower's exterior lights will remain on. Do not turn them off. Do not open the door for any reason between sundown and sunrise. The radio will produce non-standard audio. Do not respond to it. Do not attempt to engage with it. If you hear sounds outside the tower that resemble human voices, do not respond. If you see lights outside the tower that resemble vehicles or flashlights, do not respond. If you experience time loss, log it but do not investigate it. Your logbook entries should be brief and factual. The entries in the existing logbook are not yours to read. Do not read them again. Confirm." He had said Hollis several times during this. He was not in the habit of using my name. I said, "Confirmed." He said, "Hollis, one more thing. The tower has been there since 1937. The system will pass. You will be relieved. You are not the first person to do this." He clicked off. The radio returned to its silence. I sat at the desk and I read what he had said back to myself, on the page of my notebook where I'd written it down. I sat there until the lights started to go. The storm arrived at 21:47. I know the exact time because I wrote it down. It did not arrive the way storms arrive. The light didn't fail. The wind didn't pick up. What happened was that the air pressure changed. I felt it in my ears, the way you feel pressure change in an airplane. The windows of the cab made a faint, slow popping sound as the glass adjusted in the frames. Then the snow started. It didn't fall. It appeared. One moment the air outside the windows was empty, and the next moment it was full of snow, in every direction, from horizon to horizon, falling in a perfectly vertical column with no wind behind it. The exterior lights of the tower caught it and threw it back, and the world outside the windows became a wall of moving white. I went around the cab and I checked the latches on the door. The door was a heavy plank door with a steel bar across the inside. I had never paid attention to that bar before. I paid attention to it now. It was new. The wood of the door was old, but the bar and its brackets were new, and the brackets had been installed in a way that suggested somebody had wanted that bar to hold against a great deal of pressure. I sat down at the desk. The radio came on. It was not the soft hiss. It was the long, low-voiced sound I had heard before, but this time it didn't last 12 seconds. It went on. It went on for, I think, about 40 minutes. I sat at the desk and I listened to it, because the volume knob did not turn it off. I tried, and the power switch did not turn it off. I tried, and unplugging the radio did not turn it off. I tried that too. The radio sat unplugged on the desk and continued to produce the sound for the full 40 minutes, and then it stopped, and the silence came back. I want to say something about the sound. I have thought about how to describe it. The closest I can come is this: it was the sound of a very large lung breathing through a very long pipe. It was patient. It was not threatening. It did not feel hostile. It felt the way deep water feels when you are swimming over it, not malicious, but indifferent to you in a way that makes you understand your size. It was outside, too. I want to be clear about that. The sound was coming from the radio, but it was also coming from outside the tower. From a great distance. From the direction of the snow. The first night I did not sleep. I sat at the desk with the lights on and the exterior lights on and the heavy bar across the door, and I watched the snow and I listened. The sound from outside came and went. Sometimes it was very far away. Sometimes it was closer. Once, around 3 a.m, I had the unmistakable sense that something very large was standing at the base of the tower, looking up at it. I did not look out the windows. I did not check. I sat at the desk and I wrote in my notebook, 3:14 a.m., pressure change, sense of presence below tower, and I waited. At some point between 4 and 5 I lost time. I do not know how much. I came back to myself sitting at the desk with my hand on my notebook and the pen still in my fingers, and the page in front of me had writing on it that I did not remember producing. The writing said, "They are not what you think they are." The handwriting was mine. The second day was worse, because the storm did not lighten. The snow continued in its perfectly vertical column. The light through the snow was the same gray it had been when I arrived, that flat, even, shadowless light, as if the sun were nowhere in particular but everywhere at once. I made coffee. I ate. I did my checklist, even though there was nothing to check. The routine was the only thing I had left, and I clung to it. At 14:30, I heard a voice outside the tower. It was a man's voice. It was calling my name. It said, "Hollis. Hollis, are you up there? Hollis, I can't find the path. Hollis, I need you to come down." The voice was Doyle's. I sat at the desk. I did not respond. I did not go to the windows. I wrote in my notebook, 14:30, voice imitating Doyle, at base of tower, requesting descent. The voice continued for about 20 minutes. It called my name. It said it had hurt its leg. It said the snow was bad. It said the truck was down at the trailhead. It said please. It said Hollis, please. At some point it stopped. At 1450, 20 minutes later, the radio came on. It was a clear channel. Doyle's voice came through it. He said, "Hollis. Confirm position." I keyed the mic. I said, "I'm in the tower." He said, "Confirm status." I said, "I am in the tower. I am alone. I have not left the tower. Have you contacted me by any other means in the last hour?" There was a pause. He said, "No." He said, "Whatever you heard, you didn't hear." He said, "Don't open the door." He clicked off. "I want to tell you about the logbook." He had told me not to read it. I had agreed not to read it. I had been keeping that agreement for months. But on the second night of the storm, sometime after midnight, with the long low sound moving in slow waves outside the tower, I broke that agreement. I opened the logbook and I read it from the beginning. There were 40 years of entries. They were almost all no activity. But there were others. Mar 3rd, 1952. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 31 hours. Observer reported voices. Did not open door. Relieved Mar 6. Asterisk. Asterisk Jan 19th, 1961. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 19 hours. Observer reported figures at Treeling. Did not open door. Relieved Jan 21. Asterisk. Asterisk NOV 8th, 1968. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 44 hours. Observer reported descent of object. Did not open door. Relieved NOV 11. Asterisk. Asterisk February 14th, 1974. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 28 hours. Observer open door. Tower found empty February 17th. Observer not recovered. Asterisk. I read that one 3 times. There were others. Asterisk Sep 9th, 1981. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 51 hours. Observer reported imitation of family member. Did not open door. Relieved Sep 12. Asterisk. Asterisk Deck 22nd, 1989. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 67 hours. Observer experienced significant time loss. Memory of event incomplete. Recovered. Reassigned. Asterisk. Asterisk April 4th, 1996. Storm system, off pattern. Sustained 39 hours. Observer reported descent. Tower found empty. Observer not recovered. Asterisk. There were more after that. Some recovered. Some not. I closed the logbook. My hands were not shaking. I noted that. I noted that I felt very calm, and I noted that the calm felt wrong, the way the light outside the windows felt wrong, The way the snow falling without wind felt wrong. I wrote in my notebook, * they aren't watching for fire. They're watching for whatever comes down out of the storms. And they're using us to do it because there's nothing else that will sit in a tower for 40 hours and not open the door. *. I underlined not open the door. The third night I saw something. I had been careful, until then, not to look out the windows during darkness. The exterior lights of the tower threw a small ring of brightness onto the snow at the base of the tower, and beyond that ring there was nothing, not darkness, exactly, but a kind of dense gray that the snow disappeared into about 10 feet out. I had been keeping my eyes on the inside of the cab. The desk. The stove. The walls. I broke that too on the third night. I went to the north window, around 2 in the morning, because the sound outside the tower had changed. It had been the long low breath for 2 days. Now it was something else. It was a sound like a great weight settling. A slow, heavy sound, with long spaces between each iteration. It was getting closer. I looked out the north window. The snow had stopped briefly. The light had not changed. The flat shadowless gray was still there, even at 2 in the morning, which should not have been possible, but the air was clear, and I could see the country. The country was wrong. I want to describe this carefully. The country was the country I knew. It was the slope below the tower, falling away to the east, the line of larch on the far ridge, the dark notch where the spur road came up. All of that was where it should be. But the proportions were wrong. The distances were wrong. The far ridge looked closer than it should have been, and the spur road notch looked farther. The slope below the tower, which I had hiked up 4 times, looked steeper. It looked, I realized, like a place I had never been. In the middle distance, between the tower and the far ridge, there was something standing. I am going to tell you what I saw, and I want you to understand that I am telling you the smallest possible amount, because the smallest possible amount is all I am willing to carry forward, and because I do not trust the rest of what I think I saw. It was tall. It was the height of the trees around it, which means it was perhaps 100 feet tall, but I want to be careful, because the proportions of the country were wrong, and so the proportions of the thing inside the country may have been wrong too. It was standing in the snow. It was not moving. It was the source of the slow, heavy sound. I knew this because the sound was in time with something I cannot describe, a slow change in the shape of it, like breathing if the lungs were on the outside. It was not looking at the tower. That was the worst part. It was facing in a direction that was not toward the tower and not away from the tower, but somewhere else entirely, the way you might face a doorway that wasn't in the room you were in. I did not look at it for long. I stepped back from the window. I went to the desk. I wrote down the time. I wrote, figure at middle distance, north slope. Not approaching. Not aware, I closed my notebook. I went to the south windows and I closed the shutters from the inside, which is not how those shutters are supposed to be used. I closed all the shutters in the cab. I sat at the desk with the lights on and the radio silent and the heavy bar across the door, and I waited for the storm to end. It ended at 0617 on the 4th morning. I know this because I was watching the clock. The pressure changed first. I felt it in my ears again, that slow popping shift, and then the long low sound stopped, and a few minutes later, when I opened one of the south shutters, the light outside was normal. It was a normal cold morning in the eastern Oregon high country. The sky was pale blue. The snow was on the ground, perhaps 18 inches of it, and it was untouched. There were no tracks of any kind. There were no disturbances. The country looked the way the country was supposed to look. The radio came on at 0700. It was Doyle. He said, "Hollis." I said, "I'm here." He said, "Confirm status." I said, "I'm here. I'm okay. I'm coming down." He said, "Take your time. Eat something. The road's been cleared up to your trailhead. There's coffee in your truck." I said, "Doyle." He said, "Yeah." I said, "I read the logbook." There was a long pause. He said, "I know you did." He said, "Hollis, Come down. We'll talk when you come down. It's all right. He clicked off. I came down. There was, in fact, coffee in my truck, a thermos of it, still hot, sitting on the driver's seat, which had been locked. I did not ask Doyle how that had gotten there. There are a number of things I did not ask Doyle. I drove out. The spur road had been graded. There were truck tracks on it that were not mine. I followed them down to the main road, and I drove back to Pendleton, and I went to the district office, and Doyle was waiting for me in his office with the door closed. We sat. He had a folder on his desk. He didn't open it. He said, "You did fine." I said, "What is the tower for?" He said, "It's for what you did. It's for somebody to be in it when those storms come through. It's been there since 1937 and it has been continuously staffed, on an as-needed basis, for that entire period. The agency that funds it is not the Forest Service, although the Forest Service handles its logistics. I am not going to tell you which agency. I don't fully know which agency. The pay is good. The contract is good. The work is what you've already done." I said, "What is inside the storms?" He said, "Hollis, I have been doing this for 26 years and I am not going to answer that question because I do not have an answer. The people above me do not have an answer. There are theories. The theories are old. Some of them go back further than you would think. They are not theories I am cleared to discuss. What I can tell you is that the tower's job is observation. Continued observation. We watch. We log. We do not engage. The reason we do not engage is in the logbook." "You read the logbook?" I said. "The 1974 entry?" He said, "Yes." "And the 1996 entry?" "And others I haven't put in front of you." I said, "How many?" He said, "More than I want to think about." We sat for a while. He said, "Hollis, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. I would like you to keep doing this work. The reason I would like you to keep doing this work is that you went up there 4 times before the storm, and you noticed things, and you didn't open the door, and you didn't break, and there are very few people who can do all 4 of those things. The people who can do all 4 of those things are valuable. They are valuable to me, personally, because the alternative is to send somebody who cannot do all 4 of those things, and the consequences of that are in the logbook. I'm not going to pressure you. I am going to tell you that the pay scale increases substantially after your first storm, and that the agency provides a number of services, including medical, that may be relevant to you in the coming months. Take the week. Think about it. Tell me what you decide." I said, "Why is it not on any map?" He said, "Because the things that come down in those storms can read maps." He said it like he was answering a question about the weather. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I left his office. I walked to my truck. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about an hour. I took the week. I did not decide in the week. I decided in the months after. I went back. I went back through the rest of that spring, and into the summer, and through the next fall and winter. I did the routine inspections. I made the logbook entries, short ones, factual ones, in my own handwriting now, which was also slightly slanted, in blue ballpoint, which I had not noticed I had started writing in until I noticed it. There were 4 more storms. I do not want to describe them. They were not worse than the first one. They were not better. They were the same. I started to recognize the other people who did this work. There were 3 of us in the region that I knew of. We did not talk to each other directly. We saw each other at the district office sometimes, and we nodded, and we did not speak. One of them was the older woman with the reading glasses on a chain. One of them was a man I had never seen before my second storm, who I think had been doing the work for a long time, because his eyes had the settled look that I had seen in the woman's eyes, and which I started, eventually, to see in my own when I looked in the mirror in the morning. I started losing time more frequently. Small amounts. I would be driving, and then I would be at my destination, and I would not remember the last 20 minutes of the drive. I would write things in my notebook that I did not remember writing. The handwriting was always mine. The content was sometimes mine and sometimes not. I started to have a hard time remembering certain people. My sister called me on my birthday, and I spent the first 30 seconds of the call trying to remember what her voice was supposed to sound like. I remembered eventually. But I noticed. I noticed a lot of things. I noticed that the logbook entries from 40 years ago, when I read them now, had been written in a handwriting that was slightly slanted, in blue ballpoint, and that the handwriting was beginning, in a way that I could not quite articulate, to resemble mine. I mailed in my paperwork 2 weeks ago. I am not going up next season. Doyle accepted my resignation without comment. He said the agency would keep me on file in case I changed my mind. He said the medical benefits would continue for 1 year after separation. He shook my hand. I have not changed my mind. I do not think I will change my mind. But I notice, when I think about the tower, that I think about it with a feeling that is not exactly fear. It is closer to homesickness. It is the feeling you get when you remember a place you used to live. I do not know what to make of that feeling. I do not entirely trust it. I think it is one of the things I brought down out of the storms with me, and I think it is one of the things that the people who do this work for a long time eventually stop noticing, and I think the not noticing is part of how the work continues. I am writing this in the kitchen of my apartment in Pendleton. It is late. The window above the sink is open a little because the radiator is loud, and I can hear the town outside, a truck on the highway, a dog somewhere down the block, the low constant hum that I told you about at the beginning, the one I used to think was just the forest. It is here too. It has been here the whole time. I did not notice it until I came back. I want to tell you one more thing. 2 weeks ago, when I mailed in my paperwork, I drove out to Bill Pettigrew's place to tell him I had finally quit. I had not seen him in over a year. The single wide was still there. The wood shop in the back was still there. There was a new mailbox at the end of the drive, with a different name on it. I knocked on the door. A young woman answered. She had a child on her hip. She said she and her husband had bought the place 8 months ago. She said the previous owner had moved out the winter before that. She said he hadn't left a forwarding address. I asked her if she remembered his name. She thought for a moment. She said, "Pettigrew, I think." "Bill," she said. "Did you know him?" I said I had. I drove back to Pendleton. I sat in my truck in front of my building for a long time. I tried to remember the last conversation I had with Bill Pettigrew. I tried to remember what he had told me. I could remember the bourbon, and I could remember the kitchen of his single wide, and I could remember the look on his face when I had asked him what was inside the storms. But I could not, no matter how hard I tried, remember what he had answered. I have a notebook from that period. I keep it under the seat of my truck. I went and got it, and I sat at my kitchen table and I read through it, and I found the entry from the night I had gone to see him. The entry says, "Saw Bill?" He doesn't remember. Or he says he doesn't. Either way, there's nobody left who knows. The handwriting is mine. I do not remember writing it. The storms are still happening. I want you to understand that. The towers are still being staffed. The work is still being done. Somewhere up in the blues right now, in a tower that isn't on any map, someone is sitting at a desk with a logbook in front of them and a radio that is producing a soft hiss, and they are waiting. They will sit through their storm. They will not open the door. They will come down, and they will not talk about it, and they will go back up the next time they are called. I do not know what is inside the storms. I do not think I am supposed to know. I think the not knowing is the job. I think the not knowing is what they were hiring me for, all along. I think about the figure I saw on the north slope sometimes. I think about how it was not looking at the tower. I think about how the worst thing about it was not its size and not its shape, but the fact that it had no interest in me at all. I was not important to it. The tower was not important to it. We were watching it, and it was not watching us, and that, somehow, is the part one cannot stop turning over in my head. We have been watching them since 1937, in towers that aren't on any map, and they have not, in all that time, looked back. I do not know what would happen if they did. I do not want to be in a tower when they do. I am going to close my notebook now. I am going to close the window above the sink, because the hum is getting louder, and I would like to pretend, for a little while, that it isn't. I am going to go to bed. In the morning I am going to drink my coffee and I am going to look for a different kind of work. I do not think Doyle will call me again. I think he understands. But I notice, when I check my mailbox, that I check it carefully. And I notice, when the phone rings, that I look at it for a moment before I answer. And I notice, when the weather turns, and the pressure drops, and the light outside takes on that flat, shadowless quality, that some part of me, some small, quiet, settled part, is listening for a voice on a radio that isn't plugged in, calling me by my last name. I'm telling you this so you know. The towers are still there. One of them isn't on any map.